Hello and welcome to English 2. I'm your online teacher, Miss Bear. We are starting a brand new unit today. It is part of the same module that we have been looking into from Engage New York. So we are still staying on the same topic of how do authors present details to develop and refine their claims. This particular unit is called No Flies Fly into a Closed Mouth. This is Module 2, Unit 2 of the 10th grade Engage New York curriculum. We will go straight into our agenda. I am introducing the module to you right now. We will do a masterful reading. We will read and discuss. We will do a quick write, and then we will close with some homework. You will see that our agenda looks very similar to our previous unit as far as the way it is set up. You'll see the lesson sequence, you'll see the standards and the text that we will be working with every single day. So let's dig right into the introduction to this particular unit within this module. Again, it is part of the Engage New York curriculum. The state of New York, when Common Core was fairly new, the state of New York developed this collection of materials to support educators in providing college and career readiness education for all students. Now, what does that mean to us? Because in Mississippi, we don't use Common Core, right? You are right. We use what is called the Mississippi College and Career Readiness Standards, which are aligned to Common Core. They're not exactly the same, but they are so closely aligned that even this curriculum, which is a fantastic curriculum, does translate into our Mississippi College and Career Readiness Standards. As I told you in the last unit, this particular module contains 3 units. The first unit we already completed, which is the Cup of Endurance Runs Over, and that was looking at Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. This unit, the title of it is No Flies Fly into a Closed Mouth, and we are looking at a new text called A Genetics of Justice by Julia Alvarez. And then our next unit will be To Lift Men Everywhere to a Higher Standard of Life and to a Greater Enjoyment of Freedom. That is going to be the last unit in this module. So let's look at these a little more closely and look at the text for each unit. Unit 1 was fairly long. It was 20 lessons in total. Unit 2 is 10 lessons, and Unit 3 is also 10 lessons. So you will see on your screen the text that we work with for each of these units. All right, let's look at the goals for the module, and then we'll look at the goals for this particular unit. For the module as a whole, students will read, discuss, and analyze poems and informational texts, focusing on how authors use rhetoric and word choice to develop ideas or claims about human rights. Students also explore nonfiction authors, or how nonfiction authors develop arguments with claims, evidence, and reasoning. And then lastly, each of the module texts is a complex work with multiple central ideas and claims that complement or echo the central idea and claims of other texts within the module. The texts in this module offer rich opportunities to analyze authorial engagement with the struggle for human rights and to consider how an author's rhetorical choices advance purpose. Okay, so let's look more about what our end of the module task will be, and that's when we finish all 3 of these texts. So we're going to read Julia Alvarez's A Genetics of Justice this time. The last time that we met together, we read Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, and the 3rd unit features an international document and 2 speeches. For the assessment, the focal text will be you'll use for units 1 and 2, but then the 3rd text you will select from unit 3. So you'll get to choose which text from unit 3 you use. So you will identify a purpose common to all 3 texts, one from unit 1, one from unit 2, and one from unit 3, and discuss how each of the texts uses at least one of the following to advance that purpose. You may look at structure, you may look at rhetoric, or the impact of specific word choices. And so that is going to be our end of the module text. If you were with me for the last unit, you know that Unit 1 of this particular module came with lots of different tools to help you with those writing tasks. We have the Central Ideas Tracking Tool, a Rhetorical Impact Tracking Tool, and an Argument Delineation Tool. All of those are part of the Unit 1 resources in Lesson 1, the YouTube description. So go there and you can find all of the resources for that unit. For this unit, all of the resources will be listed in this description for Lesson 1, and so you will have them for the entire unit listed here. Now let's look at the goals for this particular unit that are specific to Unit 2. So, in this unit, you will engage with Julia Alvarez's autobiographical essay, A Genetics of Justice, continuing to build skills for close reading and analysis, as well as developing an understanding of the concept of human rights as represented in literary nonfiction. So, we will also look at a text called Remembering to Never Forget, and you can see the rest of the goals for you on the screen in front of you. I'm not going to waste your time and read all of those when you can read them for yourself. But what I do want to tell you for this specific unit is that A Genetics of Justice is written by author Julia Alvarez, and Julia Alvarez is an immigrant to the United States. She came here with her parents from the Dominican Republic. She does integrate into her text several Spanish words. Because she integrates these Spanish words, you'll come into contact with them and you may not know how to pronounce them. Pronunciation is not that big of a deal, and so as long as we stay on task so that we don't let the Spanish words kind of interfere with the meaning of the words themselves, then it won't be that big of a deal, and we'll just kind of work through those together. So at the end of this unit, just like we did for the previous unit, you will have a task. So you will be responding to the prompt, how does the sentence, no flies fly into a closed mouth, develop and refine one of Alvarez's ideas in A Genetics of Justice? Notice that that particular sentence is in paragraph 21, so that when we listen to the masterful reading, you'll know exactly where that sentence is, and you'll understand kind of how that sentence plays into this idea of that she develops. And so we're going to get more involved into that. So without further ado, let's dig right in and let's listen to Julia Alvarez's text. Great job. Okay, now you need to get with either a small group or a partner. Again, as we did with the last unit, anytime I tell you to get with a partner or small group, that is at the discretion of the teacher that's in your classroom who's kind of facilitating these lessons, and so they will make the final decision on whether or not you get with a partner or a small group. So we're going to do that, and you're going to answer the questions that are on your screen. Good job. Now, with that same small group or partner that you worked with, your teacher should have some Central Ideas tracking tools for you to record some information there. So I want you to go into your Central Ideas tracking tool and add information about a central idea that you heard from this particular text. Good job. Okay, let's go over some of these questions. We're not going to go over all of them, or at least I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm thinking that just like we did with a letter from Birmingham Jail, I might hand that over to you guys because you did such a good job with coming up and reading and discussing those questions from a letter from Birmingham Jail. So we might continue that for this unit because you guys did such a good job. Let's dig right in though. For the first question was, how does Alvarez begin her essay? She begins her essay by speculating about why she often imagines her parents' lives, particularly her mother's, growing up under the absolute rule of Generalissimo Rafael Trujillo. All right? How does the beginning inform your understanding of the word genetics in the title? Genetics has to do with family, heritage, and inheritance. And then, given your answer to the previous question, what might Alvarez mean by a genetics of justice? She might mean a justice that is inherited from one generation to the next. So I want to stop here before we move forward and look at any of the other questions. I want to point out some things that I did in the other unit as well, and I will continue to point out when we get to the next unit as well. When we're answering questions, we want to make sure that we are answering in complete sentences, and we want to show where that information comes from. So we use paragraph numbers for essays, and we use line numbers for poetry. So keep that in mind. I'm going to remind you again, just so you know. But you see that we also use brackets when we need to incorporate or when we need to make sure that we add something to make the sentence structure more sound. So we added this imagines her parents' lives when we put this quote in. But you see we've got paragraph 1, and that is for this part of the quote and this other part of the quote. So you see, anytime we are quoting information, we want to put where the information comes from, and we also want to make sure that our sentence structure remains sound. Okay? So do I have a volunteer who will come up and do the next 2 questions for this unit? And I'm going to put the question and the, not the correct response necessarily, but it's the model response. And so you may have an answer to one of these questions that is still a really good answer that just might need a little revision. So it includes information from the model response. So I'm going to have one of you guys come up and lead the discussion for the next 2 questions. Fantastic job. Okay, so now I have another set of questions, so I want another volunteer that will come up and read the next 2 questions and lead that discussion. Great job. Okay, I am really impressed with that, but there are a couple of things that I want to go over in the next slide, a couple of questions that I need to kind of spend a little more time with. So let's look at those, especially that very first question was, what is the impact of Alvarez's repetition of must have in paragraph 3? So we're looking at repetition, which we know is a what? That's right, it is a rhetorical device, and so we're looking at the impact of a rhetorical device. And so Alvarez shows that she is not sure what her mother thought of Trujillo, okay? So make sure that you have that response written, revise what it is that you already have on your paper, because it's important that you understand the impact of the repetition and that you track that in the rhetorical impact tracking tool. Hopefully your teacher has given you a copy of that. If not, you had that tracking tool before and you can keep track of it even without that particular tool or the worksheet that tool was involved with. All right, so let's look at the next question. How does the statement, "She knew nothing of the horrid crimes of the dictatorship," refine your understanding of Alvarez's use of must have to describe her mother's opinion of Trujillo in paragraph 3? And so you see that Alvarez speculates that her mother must have been intrigued or thought of Trujillo as a movie star, or she wanted to meet the great man because her mother did not know that he was a violent criminal. Okay? And then lastly, how does the evidence that Alvarez provides in paragraph 4 support her use of must have in paragraph 3? And you see in paragraph 4, Alvarez shows that her mother did daydream about Trujillo, imagining that he looked down benefactly at her as she read her romantic novellas and dreamed of meeting the great love of her life. Well, we know that's not really true. But at that point in her life, she did probably feel that way, or Alvarez imagines her mother feeling that way. Alvarez continues, sometimes in her daydreams, her great love wore the handsome young dictator's face to show Trujillo's influence on her mother. So you see the importance of me going over this particular set of questions. I'm going to move to the next set of questions, and again, there are 3, but I want a volunteer in your classroom to come up and lead that discussion. I love it when you guys lead the discussion. It just impacts it in such a different way, and it's just so good. All right, now it is time for your quick write. Before we get to the quick write, I want to remind you, in the last unit, I asked that everybody get a binder that they keep up with their work in, because in the last lesson, in the last unit, we had a lot of lessons, 20 of them, and we had a quick write with every single lesson, and we had these rhetorical impact tracking tools, this argument delineation tool, and the central ideas tracking tool. We had all these different worksheets that we needed to keep up with. But I still think it's important when we are working on any unit that you have a binder that you keep your information in specifically for that unit. And so whether or not you get a new binder or you put a different section in the binder that you had for the last unit, but it is important that you have a binder to keep all of your information close and easily accessible, because you are going to need all of the information that we're gaining. You're going to need that information to do your quick writes every day, and then to finish the unit with the end of the unit task. So, and then of course you're going to need all of that from the last unit and this unit and the next unit in order to write your end of the module task, because that's going to be a monster. All right, but I think you're going to be ready, because you were ready for the last one. You guys did a great job. Okay, so now for your quick write, get out a piece of paper, and I want you to analyze how Alvarez unfolds Trujillo's impact on her mom in paragraphs 1 through 6. Use your annotations to find evidence. Great job. Okay. Now, we have a little bit of homework. Now, I will say for this particular unit, there are several days where you don't have any homework at all, and I know that you're going to be really excited about that. But for this time, because we have already listened to a masterful reading of A Genetics of Justice, you need a little bit more information into the regime of Trujillo. And so you are going to read, and your teacher should have a handout for you for this, you're going to read the article, Remembering to Never Forget by Mark Memot, and I want you to box any unfamiliar words and look up their definitions. Choose the definitions that make the most sense in the context and write a brief definition above or near the word in the text. Then I want you to develop your own questions about Rafael Trujillo's dictatorship, and then conduct a brief search for information to answer those questions. And that is the end of the first lesson in this unit. So until next time, happy learning.